Hey, it's AC from the AC Show. I want to talk to you about why I think Marvel Comics will never release the next Watchmen. I've been thinking about this and mulling it over in my mind, and I think that Marvel has had a lot of problems, as we all know, recently, and it's due to a lot of politics and mostly leftist politics. They want to use their characters as jump-off boards and jumping boards off into political narratives of today. And there's problems with that. I think when you compare the Watchmen comic to the Marvel comics of today, there are some major differences of why Watchmen is so well loved and why the comics of today from Marvel are so despised. I think first and foremost, what's worth mentioning is that the Watchmen world uses its own world. They don't use existing characters, but they pretend like they're using existing characters. So they have a kind of throwback feel to all of their heroes and the lore that they put out. You know, Alan Moore and Gibbons did a great job establishing a world that felt real, even though it was an alternative universe where, you know, Nixon gets a third term and the superheroes are really dealing with the psychological struggles of being heroes. The trouble with Marvel, though, is that they're trying to deal with the real problems just like the Watchmen people are trying to deal with real problems. But they're stuck in the fantasy realm of superhero comics. And there's been a lot of debate and talk about whether or not the Watchmen book is even a superhero comic, because it's really more about, maybe a little bit of science fiction, and also a little bit of a what-if story. But I think the major difference between the Watchmen book and Marvel Comics is just the fact that the tone is totally different. The tone is totally different. So whereas a guy like Rorschach can talk about the problems of the people and the therapist that he has to sit down with, and he knows that it's all total farce, and he freaks everyone out because he kind of sees the world the way that he sees it, and it makes a lot of sense to the reader too, especially near the end when he doesn't want to give up all that they've done for the noble lie that Amadeus wants to go for. So I think his name is Amadeus. Oh, Asmodeus, yeah. Asmodeus, something like that. So yeah, we all know who that character is. But he doesn't want to give into the noble lie. That's been set up for that whole wonderful arc, and the grand narrative of the Watchmen is do we as a society, as a reader, accept the noble lie? Are we willing to, just like that kid on the last page, are we willing to tell the truth? And with Marvel, it's as if they want to tell the truth, but they can't because it's all mired in superheroisms. So I think that, for one, Marvel Comics is not using its own new world, new universe. They're just they're just using existing characters that people have looked up to as Americana heroes. People love Spider-Man. People love the Hulk. They love Thor. They love who else? Venom, even though he's a bad guy. People love Mary Jane, Iron Man. We love these heroes, and we wear their T-shirts and hats. These characters are not on the level of the Watchmen characters. We can be honest. These characters are not on the same level of emotional gravitas, and they don't have the same deepness that the tone of the Watchmen book does. Now, of course, there's a lot more material for all these wonderful heroes, and I'm not trying to knock on even Batman or Superman or Aquaman, Wonder Woman, or Green Lantern. These are all wonderful characters, but they don't have the tone, except for a little bit of Batman. Batman can get there, but they just don't have the tone that the Watchmen series gets to. I mean, with characters like Comedian, and raping and murdering and all these kind of things, and You have the characters of like Night Owl or Silk Spectre. It seems like they're dealing with real, deeper existential issues, whereas Superman is dealing with the concept of justice, and he's a kind of an embodiment of it. So there's a bit of more of an archetypical nature to superheroes, whereas with the Watchmen characters, they come off more human. So I think that's the one thing. Secondly, the Watchmen book doesn't necessarily try to apply the moral truth to you. It requires you to think about what the right decision is, and it doesn't really make the moral choices for you. It just is more of a camera, watching as these events conspire, and it's not judging. It doesn't have a critic's eye. It just has a narrative eye. Whereas with Marvel Comics today, the moral is assumed before, and then the story is written after. So, Nazis are bad. It's bad to be racist. It's bad to hate homosexual people. Or, we need to learn to love everyone despite our differences. These are moral platitudes that everyone agrees to, and because of that, there's no moral learning. There's no like moral growth with the Marvel heroes. They're stuck with the format that they're in, I suppose. But also, the major difference that I'm trying to emphasize is that the Watchmen heroes, you get to decide, and I think there are right choices and wrong choices, but you have to decide whether or not Rorschach, did the right thing by sending off that letter or that book, the journal. You have to decide whether or not he did the right thing or not. Or you have to decide whether or not Ozymandias did the right thing by lying to the world so that the world would put down all of their arms. I think there's a right answer to these questions. But the point is that the book lets you decide. The book lets you think critically about those issues. And I have my own view. My view is, it's irrelevant to the video. But with Marvel, there's no moral growth. There's no room for interpretation. There's no room for critical thinking. It's just, this is a bad person. Captain America is a bad guy because he serves the Nazis, or he serves Hydra, which is the Nazi version in Marvel Comics. And because of that, and you make comparisons to with the Donald Trump and what's the character? They made a comic book, imitating Trump, MODOK. So the trouble is just that if Marvel ever wants to make a comic book on the level of DC's Watchmen, they have to be more thoughtful on how they present their material. They have to take a step back. I think they could if they took a tone that was more. They had a little more realism, Had a little more. If they had artists that actually knew what they were doing and they didn't pay. They didn't have a new hire constantly paying them less, and you're not getting the kind of material that you're looking for when you're looking for an awesome comic book story. I think what they need is they need to stop with pushing their political answers to modern day problems. And they need to instead set up a scenario, I suppose maybe like the first Civil War, where there's a dilemma. But don't give the answer and don't make the answer so obvious. So for example, I read Secret Wars, and that was interesting. But I think the better example might be Civil War II, with Carol Danvers, and Iron Man. And look, to me, it was cut and dry from the first issue. I think that the moral quandary like for Secret Empire, I don't see why it had to be 12 issues long. I would think it was 10 or 12. I mean, that it just didn't need to be that long. Civil War II was 8 issues long. And I think that you need to understand the depth of the problem and how many issues it's going to go for. But also you need to seriously deal with the quandary itself. If the quandary isn't worth writing 10 issues over, then don't do it. And also, I think that one thing that's just lacking with Marvel Comics is that there's no artistic courage. There's no artistic courage to do daring things like the Watchmen book. Starting a new universe and all this kind of stuff. And having the artistic ability to graph out every single panel from front to back. From how Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons did that. So that's my thoughts. I think that if Marvel ever wants to do a great comic book that people will want to hail as one of the best comics or examples of the medium, they have to write a story that has meaningful content, whereas with respect to moral, spiritual, maybe even legal consequences, but they have to do it where the camera or the narrative isn't being assumed for you. I don't want to be led by the nose as a reader. I want to be able to think for myself. So if they really need to imitate some of the features, they don't have to make a carbon copy Watchmen. But they have to imitate some of the features that lets the reader go on the journey instead of being led by the nose. I suppose it's a little different. Maybe one last analogy is people like to go to haunted houses. And haunted houses usually you go with the group and you hold on to a rope and everyone on your party holds on to the rope. So as long as the leader is leading the way, then you all go through at the same pace and everyone gets scared. And that's great. That works. But a real haunted house doesn't have a rope. It doesn't have someone leading you on the way. And they need to cover their tracks if they're going to write a great story. So that when you go through the haunted house, it appears natural. It appears really haunted and not just superficially haunted. So that's really my thoughts, is that Marvel Comics today are just superficial. And that's why I just stopped reading them. I stopped reading after Spider-Man, Miles Morales, because the characters were not being written like human beings. They were being written by leftist politicians. I stopped reading Iron Man because they were no longer being written as characters. They were being written as diversity characters. Riri Williams and Osmond A.S. Cho, Lady Thor. These are, in my opinion, and even Spider-Man. I love Miles Morales, but after you destroy every single character and put them in comas or you kill them off, I begin to wonder, what's wrong? What's wrong with the old heroes? I like the old heroes. I wanted to read a great character with lore and art and story, but instead we just get these diversity hires, these diversity heroes. And I have nothing against diversity heroes, but when you harvest out the organs and climb into the shell, and you call yourself the same name as the hero that you essentially body snatched, they come off as more invaders than actual heroes. These heroes come off as more as a body snatcher than an actual, true blue hero that you want to root for. I don't want to root for a person like Riri Williams, who just body snatches Iron Man in his name. I don't want to root for Miles Morales, despite how much I care. I mean, I got into comic books my second time because of Miles. he just body snatched Peter Parker. Now Peter Parker's doing old Iron Man stories, or close to, because he's the CEO of his Parker Industries. I don't want to read. I don't want to read Peter Parker if he's running his own company and all this kind of stuff. That's maybe it's just me, but I just don't. I don't want to read Spider-Man. And maybe it's selfish of me to want to have my hero locked in his timeline, just like Bart Simpson. I love Bart, but he's locked in the first grade. So there you go. I don't think I have much more else to say. Tell me what you think. Tell me if you think that my Watchmen analogy works. And I know I've got some things wrong. I'm just ranting. I don't have a script or anything. So tell me your thoughts on it. Do you think Marvel will ever have a new Watchmen type series that will set the comic book world on fire? Or do you think that they're stuck in their ways because of just the people that they've hired and the lack of artistic ability and courage that they have? So thanks again. Please leave a like, comment, tell me what you think. Subscribe too. And I will talk to you later. Thanks.